The final battle never came. Instead, Amy Rodriguez stood in the council chambers on Nexus Prime, surrounded by representatives from 1,000,000 human worlds, while the greatest armada in galactic history waited peacefully in orbit above. The Terra's Vengeance and thousands of other human vessels had positioned themselves around the capital world, not as conquerors, but as guests, their weapons powered down, but their presence unmistakable. Admiral Corex Thane had made the decision that saved his people from a war they could not win. Rather than order his fleets to make a hopeless last stand, he had chosen to meet with the human commanders and learn what they truly wanted. The conversations that followed changed everything he thought he knew about the species his people had exiled 3 centuries earlier. "We do not seek your surrender," Amy had told him during their first meeting. "We seek recognition as equals. We want to contribute to galactic civilization, not destroy it, but we will not be cast aside again based on fear and prejudice." The signing of the new Galactic Accords took place in the same chamber where humanity's exile had been decreed centuries earlier. But this time, humans were not standing as defendants pleading their case. They were negotiating as equals with the strength of 1,000,000 worlds behind them. The terms were not punitive or vengeful, but transformative, establishing a new framework for galactic governance that recognized the reality of human expansion and capability. Patricia Barnes arrived from Terra Prime aboard a ship that demonstrated the full scope of human technological achievement. The vessel was not a warship, but a mobile city, complete with parks and residential areas that housed representatives from hundreds of human colonies. As it settled into orbit around Nexus Prime, alien observers could see through transparent sections of the hull that this was not just a ship, but a functioning community, a demonstration of how humans had learned to make any environment their home. The cultural exchange programs began immediately, with young beings from dozens of species traveling to human worlds to see firsthand what had been accomplished during the exile years. They returned with stories that seemed impossible. Cities floating in the clouds of gas giants, farms that grew food in the vacuum of space using only starlight and asteroid minerals, research stations that operated inside the coronas of active stars. Jake Morrison finally left his underground archive on New Montana, bringing with him the complete historical records that he had preserved for 40 years. These documents became the foundation for the new historical curriculum that would be taught throughout the galaxy, ensuring that future generations would understand both the mistakes that had led to humanity's exile and the achievements that had emerged from their determination to survive. Lisa Hamilton found herself appointed as one of the technical liaisons between human and alien engineering teams, helping to share the innovations that humans had developed during their centuries of isolation. The technologies that had seemed impossible to council scientists were revealed to be logical extensions of principles that any species could learn, given enough time and motivation to push beyond traditional limitations. The integration process was not without challenges. Many council species struggled to understand how humans had achieved so much in environments that seemed completely hostile to life. The answer lay not in any single breakthrough, but in humanity's approach to problem-solving, their willingness to adapt themselves to their environment rather than simply adapting their environment to themselves. Kevin Walsh established the first interspecies medical research center on Nexus Prime, sharing the biological adaptation techniques that humans had developed to survive in extreme environments. These methods offered hope to species that had been limited to specific types of worlds, opening up vast new regions of the galaxy for colonization and exploration. The economic impact of human return was immediate and dramatic. Trade routes that had been stagnant for centuries came alive as human ships began moving cargo between systems that other species had considered too dangerous or remote to visit. The asteroid mining operations that humans had developed during their exile provided resources that the Council had never known existed. Steve Martinez's asteroid fleet became the backbone of a new type of mobile civilization with entire communities that could travel between star systems while maintaining full industrial and agricultural capacity. The concept revolutionized thinking about space colonization, showing that it was possible to be completely independent of planetary resources while still maintaining a high standard of living. Nicole Foster's stealth technology was shared with Council security forces, but only after careful negotiations that ensured it would be used for exploration and rescue operations rather than military aggression. The ability to move unseen through space opened up new possibilities for scientific research and emergency response that had never been possible before. Tony Chen's research vessel became the flagship of a new era of galactic exploration, with mixed crews of humans and aliens working together to study phenomena that had been too dangerous for any single species to investigate alone. The collaborative approach produced discoveries that neither group could have achieved independently. The political structure of the galaxy was fundamentally altered by human return. Instead of a single governing council dominated by the original member species, the new system recognized the reality of human expansion by granting them representation proportional to their actual population and territorial control. This meant that humans held nearly half the seats in the new Galactic Assembly, reflecting their status as the most widespread and numerous species in known space. The military implications were equally significant. The combined human fleets represented more firepower than all other galactic civilizations combined, but they used this strength to establish peace rather than impose dominance. The mere existence of human military capability ended several ongoing conflicts between alien species, as none of them wanted to risk triggering human intervention. Admiral Corex Thane found himself working closely with human military commanders to establish new protocols for galactic security. The old system of maintaining peace through mutual deterrence was replaced by a cooperative approach that used human technological superiority to protect weaker species from aggression. The result was the most peaceful period in galactic history. Zara Quinn's research into human culture became required reading for diplomatic personnel throughout the galaxy. Her insights into human psychology and social organization helped other species understand how to work effectively with their new partners. The key was recognizing that humans approached every challenge as a problem to be solved rather than a limitation to be accepted. The transformation of Nexus Prime itself reflected the new galactic order. Human engineers worked with alien architects to expand the capital city, incorporating design principles that had been developed on worlds with extreme environmental conditions. The result was a city that could accommodate beings from any environment, with sections adapted for aquatic species, high-gravity dwellers, and energy-based life forms. Jake Morrison established the Galactic Historical Institute in a building that symbolized the new era, constructed using materials and techniques from dozens of different worlds, including asteroid metal from human mining operations and living crystal from crystalline collective worlds. The building itself demonstrated how different species could work together to create something greater than any of them could achieve alone. Children from multiple species played together in the parks of New Terra City, the expanded capital district of Nexus Prime that had been built to accommodate the new galactic government. Human children who had grown up on asteroid habitats played alongside young Aquari who had never seen dry land, while crystalline offspring learned games from botanical youth who communicated through chemical signals. The final scene of humanity's return played out not in government chambers or military headquarters, but in these parks and schools, where the next generation was learning to see diversity as strength rather than division. The lessons of the exile years had been learned. Isolation bred fear and stagnation, while cooperation and exchange led to growth and innovation that benefited everyone. Amy Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the Terra's Vengeance as it patrolled the outer systems of the galaxy alongside ships from a dozen different species. The human fleet had become the guardians of galactic peace, not through conquest, but through the example of what could be achieved when determination met opportunity. The million worlds that had seemed like exile had become the foundation for a new era of galactic civilization. The message was clear to anyone who chose to listen. Humanity had returned not as the species that had been cast out centuries earlier, but as something new and greater. They had taken the challenge of exile and transformed it into the opportunity of a lifetime, proving that adversity could forge strength and that the galaxy was large enough for everyone who was willing to reach for the stars. Steve Martinez commanded the asteroid fleet that emerged from what the Council had always assumed was empty space in the Vega system. His ships had been built inside hollowed-out rocks, invisible to conventional sensors, and protected by the natural camouflage of the asteroid field. For 2 centuries, his people had lived and worked in these hidden bases, preparing for the day when they would reveal themselves to a galaxy that had forgotten they existed. The sight that greeted the Council's emergency response fleet was unlike anything in their experience. Dozens of asteroids suddenly came alive with engine fire and weapon systems, revealing themselves to be massive ships that had been hiding in plain sight for generations. The tactical advantage was overwhelming. The Council ships had no idea which rocks were harmless debris and which were armed vessels until it was too late to react effectively. Nicole Foster led her invisible fleet toward the core worlds, using stealth technology that made her ships appear to be nothing more than background radiation on enemy sensors. Her people had mastered the art of moving unseen through space, developing cloaking systems that worked by bending light and energy around their vessels rather than simply blocking it. The Council's detection networks had been scanning right through her ships for decades without ever realizing they were there. The true scope of human expansion began to reveal itself as fleet after fleet emerged from systems that the Council had written off as worthless or uninhabitable. From the radiation-soaked worlds orbiting neutron stars, human ships powered by exotic energy sources that the Council could barely understand. From the frozen moons of gas giants, vessels that had been built in underground facilities carved from ice and rock. From the burning desert worlds too close to their suns, heat-resistant ships that thrived in environments that would cook most alien species. Tony Chen broadcast to the galaxy from his research vessel as it traveled between human worlds, documenting the incredible diversity of human adaptation. His message was not aimed at the Council, but at the other species throughout the galaxy, showing them what humanity had accomplished during their centuries of exile. The broadcast revealed colonies built inside gas giant atmospheres, floating cities that harvested rare elements from the churning storms of massive planets. On Nexus Prime, the Council emergency session continued as reports flooded in from across their territory. What had begun as scattered attacks was revealed to be a coordinated operation involving millions of human vessels operating from bases that spanned the galaxy. The outer rim worlds that the Council had always considered empty frontier were revealed to be densely populated with human settlements, each one contributing ships and resources to the massive fleet now approaching the core systems. Admiral Corex, Thane stood before the tactical display in the Council's military headquarters, watching red symbols multiply across the map as human fleets were detected in systems throughout Council space. Each new contact represented not just a few ships, but entire battle groups, suggesting a level of organization and preparation that had been building for centuries. The scale of the operation was staggering, involving coordination across distances that should have made such planning impossible. "How could we have missed this?" Corex asked his intelligence staff. "How could millions of humans be living and building throughout the galaxy without our knowledge?" "They were not hiding from us, Admiral," came the reply from one of his analysts. "They were living in places we never thought to look. Asteroid fields we considered worthless, planets we deemed uninhabitable, star systems we wrote off as too dangerous to explore. They turned our assumptions about what was possible into their greatest advantage. The Krell Empire, known throughout the galaxy for their warrior culture and military prowess, surprised everyone by announcing their support for the human cause. Their ambassador to the Council, a massive reptilian being covered in battle scars, rose to address the emergency session with words that sent shock waves through the chamber. "The Krell respect strength and honor above all else," the ambassador declared. "For 3 centuries, we have watched the humans survive and thrive in conditions that would have destroyed lesser species. They have earned our respect through their determination and their refusal to surrender in the face of overwhelming odds. The Krell Empire recognizes humanity's right to return to the civilized galaxy." Other species began to question the Council's authority as the scope of human achievement became clear. The Aquari delegation wondered aloud why they had been told that humans were primitive and dangerous, when the evidence suggested they had become one of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. The Botanical Union expressed interest in learning about human agricultural techniques that allowed them to grow food in environments where no other species could survive. Patricia Barnes prepared for the final phase of the operation from her command center on Terra Prime, the world that had once been called Earth. The planet had been transformed during the centuries of human absence, its surface covered with cities and installations that supported the massive fleet operations now underway. From this symbolic heart of human space, she coordinated the movements of fleets scattered across hundreds of star systems. The revelation that humans had colonized Terra Prime came as perhaps the greatest shock to the Council. They had assumed that Earth remained empty after the human exile, a dead world that served as a monument to their former presence. Instead, it had become the beating heart of a civilization that spanned the galaxy, connected by communication networks and trade, routes that the Council had never detected. Steve Martinez watched as his asteroid ships revealed their true nature to the Council forces that had come to investigate the Vega system. What the aliens saw defied everything they thought they knew about space-based construction and engineering. Entire cities had been carved out of the largest asteroids, complete with manufacturing facilities, defensive systems, and populations that numbered in the millions. The asteroids themselves had been modified with engines and life support systems, turning them into mobile worlds that could travel between star systems. The psychological impact on Council forces was as devastating as the military one. Their ships and crews had been trained to fight against conventional opponents using familiar technologies and tactics. Facing human vessels that seemed to violate the basic laws of physics and engineering, created a level of fear and uncertainty that made effective resistance almost impossible. Nicole Foster's stealth fleet materialized around the Council's primary military base without warning, appearing from empty space like ghosts becoming solid. The base's defenses had been designed to detect incoming threats from light years away, but the human ships had been hiding in the same system for months, invisible to all sensors until they chose to reveal themselves. The demonstration of human technological superiority was complete and undeniable. Communications networks throughout Council space began carrying Tony Chen's broadcasts, showing species after species what humanity had accomplished during their exile. Underwater cities on ocean worlds, where humans had learned to breathe liquid oxygen and work in pressurized environments. Underground colonies on volcanic worlds, where geothermal energy-powered civilizations built in caverns carved from living rock. Orbital habitats around binary stars, where humans harvested energy from stellar interactions that would incinerate most other species. The broadcasts also revealed the cultural achievements of exiled humanity. Art and music that incorporated elements from dozens of different environments, creating new forms of expression that could only have developed in the extreme conditions where humans had learned to live. Scientific discoveries that came from studying phenomena that other species considered too dangerous to approach. Technologies that had been developed out of necessity but had applications that could benefit the entire galaxy. Young species throughout Council space began to see humanity, not as a threat, but as an inspiration. If humans could survive and thrive in conditions that seemed impossible, what could other species accomplish if they pushed beyond their traditional limitations? The rigid thinking that had dominated Council policy for centuries was being challenged by the example of human adaptability and innovation. On Nexus Prime, Greg Thompson continued to serve as humanity's ambassador, explaining to the shocked Council members that the returning fleets represented only a fraction of human space. For every ship they could see, there were dozens more supporting them from hidden bases and secret installations. The million worlds of the title were not an exaggeration, but a conservative estimate of human expansion during the exile years. You see our fleets and think in terms of military conquest, Greg told the assembly. But you are missing the larger picture. We have built a civilization that spans the galaxy, connected by trade and communication networks that operate beyond your detection. We have learned to live in harmony with environments that you consider hostile, and we have developed technologies that could solve many of the problems facing your own worlds. The offer was clear. Humanity was returning not as conquerors, but as... The emergency session on Nexus Prime began at dawn, with representatives from 12 species gathering in the Great Council chamber that had served as the center of galactic government for over 1,000 years. Speaker Velith Moore, a tall Zephyrian, with silver skin and 4 arms, called the meeting to order as urgent reports continued to flood in from across Council space. Border stations had gone silent. Trade routes were being disrupted, and worst of all, ships were appearing in systems where no ships should exist. Admiral Corex Thane paced in front of the tactical display, his blue scales shifting color as his stress levels increased. The Zephyrian military commander had spent his entire career preparing for threats from hostile alien species beyond Council space, but nothing had prepared him for what they were seeing now. The sensor readings made no sense. Ships that appeared to be using technology that violated known physics, moving in patterns that suggested a level of coordination that should have been impossible. Honored Council members, Corex began, his voice tight with concern. We are facing an invasion unlike anything in our recorded history. The attackers are using technology we do not understand, arriving from directions we did not think were populated, and demonstrating tactical knowledge that suggests they have been studying our defenses for a very long time. Greg Thompson sat in the observation gallery, watching the panic spread through the council chamber as more reports arrived. For 50 years, he had worked as an intelligence analyst for the Zephyrian government, earning their trust and gathering information that would prove invaluable when this day finally came. None of his alien colleagues suspected that the quiet human who had served them so faithfully was actually a deep cover operative, one of hundreds placed throughout council space during the decades following the exile. The first major engagement had occurred near the Titan Nebula, where a council patrol fleet had encountered ships that seemed to emerge from empty space. The battle had lasted less than 10 minutes, with the council forces completely overwhelmed by weapons and tactics they had never seen before. The few survivors spoke of ships that seemed to learn and adapt during the fight, becoming more effective with each exchange of fire. Velith Moore tried to maintain order as representatives from different species shouted questions and accusations across the chamber floor. The Aquari delegation demanded to know why their water worlds were being targeted, while the Crystalline Collective insisted that their silicon-based technology should have made them immune to whatever weapons were being used against the border stations. Perhaps we should consider the possibility that this is not a random attack, suggested Councillor Yeren of the Botanical Union, her plant-like form rustling with nervous energy. The precision of the strikes, the apparent knowledge of our defensive positions, the technology being used. This suggests that whoever is attacking us has been preparing for this moment for a very long time. Greg Thompson knew it was time to reveal himself. He had spent half a century building relationships and gathering intelligence for this moment, and now his real mission could begin. He rose from his seat in the observation gallery and spoke, in a voice that carried clearly through the chamber. Honorable Council members, may I suggest that you are looking at this situation from the wrong perspective. You keep referring to this as an invasion, but perhaps you should consider the possibility that this is actually a homecoming. The chamber fell silent as every eye turned toward the human who had worked among them for so long. Velith Moore's arms gestured in confusion as she tried to understand what her former intelligence analyst was saying. Around the chamber, other species representatives stared in shock at the revelation that a human had been operating in their midst for decades. Gregory Thompson, Velith Moore said slowly, using his full name for the first time in years. What are you saying? Are you suggesting that you know something about these attacks? Greg Thompson descended from the observation gallery to the center of the chamber, where he had never been allowed to stand before. Speaker Moore, members of the council, I am here to deliver a message from the human species. We have returned to reclaim our rightful place in galactic civilization. You cast us out 3 centuries ago as unworthy and dangerous. We come back now as your equals, demanding the recognition that was denied to us. The chamber erupted in chaos as the implications of his words became clear. Corex Thane moved toward his weapon, but Greg raised his hands to show that he carried no arms. Other security personnel began to converge on the human, but Velith Moore gestured for them to stop. She needed to hear what he had to say. The ships, attacking your border stations, are human vessels, crewed by the descendants of those you exiled, Greg continued. We have spent 3 centuries preparing for this moment, learning from our forced separation, and growing stronger in ways you never imagined possible. We do not seek conquest, but we will not be denied our place among the stars again. Ryan. Parker led the human vanguard as it swept through the outer systems of Council space. his battle group encountering minimal resistance from the scattered patrol fleets that tried to intercept them. The Council ships were designed for conventional warfare between roughly equal opponents, but the human vessels operated according to principles that made traditional tactics useless. The Terra's Vengeance and her escort ships moved through space. Like predators, their adaptive systems learning from each engagement and sharing that knowledge with the rest of the fleet through quantum communication networks. Every battle made the human forces more effective, while the Council ships continued to use the same tactics that had served them for centuries. Zara Quinn, a young intern working in the Council's Xenological Research Department, had been studying human culture for her advanced degree when the invasion began. Unlike most of her colleagues, she had read the banned historical records about humanity's exile and had developed theories about what the species might have become during their centuries of isolation. Now, as she watched the tactical reports come in, her worst fears were being confirmed. "Speaker Moore," Zara said, requesting permission to address the emergency session, "I believe I can provide some insight into what we are facing. I have been studying human culture and psychology for my research project, and I think we may have underestimated the long-term consequences of their exile." Velith Moore gestured for the young researcher to continue, hoping that someone could provide answers to the crisis that was overwhelming their defenses. Around the chamber, other council members leaned forward to hear what the intern had discovered in her studies. "Humans are not like other species," Zara explained. "They do not simply adapt to their environment, they actively reshape it to suit their needs. When we exiled them to the galaxy's rim, we assumed they would either die out or be reduced to primitive survival. Instead, we gave them 3 centuries to develop technologies and strategies specifically designed to overcome our advantages." The reports continued to arrive from across Council space as human fleets struck targets throughout the outer territories. Mining stations, research outposts, and military bases were being captured or destroyed with a precision that suggested detailed knowledge of their locations and defenses. The human forces were not just attacking randomly, they were systematically dismantling the Council's ability to resist their advance. Greg Thompson continued his explanation to the stunned Council members, describing the scope of human expansion. During the exile years, colonies in systems that the Council had deemed uninhabitable, space stations built inside asteroids and gas giant atmospheres, generation ships that had been traveling between distant stars for decades. The galaxy's rim was not the empty wasteland that the Council had believed, but a thriving region filled with human settlements. "You thought you were sending us into exile," Greg said. "Instead, you gave us room to grow without interference. You thought you were limiting our access to resources. Instead, you taught us to find resources in places you never thought to look. You thought you were preventing us from developing dangerous technologies. Instead, you gave us centuries to innovate without restrictions." Admiral Corax Thane studied the tactical displays with growing alarm as the true scope of the human attack became clear. This was not a simple military invasion, but a coordinated operation involving thousands of ships operating across multiple sectors simultaneously. The precision and scale of the assault suggested a level of organization and planning that should have been impossible to hide from Council intelligence services. "How many ships are we facing?" Corax asked his tactical staff, though he suspected he would not like the answer. "Current estimates suggest at least 10,000 vessels of various sizes," came the reply. "But the numbers keep increasing as new fleets arrive from directions we thought were uninhabited. Some of our long-range sensors are detecting formations that stretch beyond the range of our equipment." Ryan Parker's battle group encountered the first serious resistance near the industrial world of Kepler Station, where a Council defense fleet had been hastily assembled to protect the major manufacturing facilities. Danny Cooper stood on the observation deck of Shipyard 7, watching the final hull plates being welded onto the massive dreadnought that had consumed 5 years of his life. The ship stretched for nearly 2 miles in length, its dark metal surface covered with weapon systems and defensive arrays that incorporated technology the galaxy had never seen before. Around it, smaller vessels moved like worker bees, adding the final touches to humanity's greatest achievement. The shipyard itself was hidden deep within the Vega asteroid field, carved out of 3 large asteroids that had been hollowed out and connected by massive tunnels. From the outside, it looked like just another collection of space rocks drifting through the void. The Council's long-range sensors had passed over this area dozens of times during the past century, never suspecting that inside these asteroids, humanity was building the largest fleet in galactic history. Amy Rodriguez walked through the corridors of the Terra's Vengeance, inspecting systems that her crew had been testing for months. As captain of the flagship, she carried the weight of 3 centuries of human hope and determination. Every system on the ship had been designed and built by human hands, incorporating lessons learned from decades of studying alien weaknesses and developing new technologies in secret. The bridge of the Terra's Vengeance was unlike anything the Council had ever designed. Instead of rigid command structures and fixed stations, the human ship used adaptive interfaces that could reconfigure themselves based on battle conditions. The ship's artificial intelligence was not just a computer program, but a learning system that could evolve its tactics in real time, becoming more effective with each engagement. In his laboratory deep within the ship, Kevin Walsh made final adjustments to the biological warfare systems that he hoped would never need to be used. As humanity's chief xenobiologist, he had spent his career studying every species in the Galactic Council, learning their vulnerabilities and developing countermeasures. Not because humans wanted to hurt anyone, but because they had learned the hard way that being unprepared was a luxury they could not afford. The communication came simultaneously to every human world scattered across the galaxy's outer rim. On mining platforms orbiting dead stars, in underground cities beneath frozen worlds, aboard generation ships that had been traveling between systems for decades, the same message reached every human ear. The coordinates had been received. The return was beginning. It was time to come home. On New Pittsburgh, the industrial heart of human space, factory workers received the signal while they were assembling the last components for hundreds of warships. The world's surface was covered with manufacturing facilities powered by geothermal energy drawn from the planet's unstable core. For 200 years, every human colony had contributed resources to this world, building the infrastructure needed to supply a galactic war. Lisa Hamilton stood in the archive beneath New Montana, still trying to understand the scope of what Jake Morrison was showing her. Maps of the galaxy displayed the true extent of human expansion, with colonies marked in systems that the Council considered uninhabitable or worthless. Humans had learned to thrive in environments that would kill most other species, using their adaptability and technological innovation to turn hostile worlds into thriving communities. "We have been preparing for this day since the exile began," Jake explained as he showed her records of the massive coordinated effort that had been hidden from the galaxy for centuries. Every human child born during the exile was taught the same lessons: survive, adapt, innovate, and never forget that someday we would return to reclaim our place among the stars. the activation signals spread from world to world as the beacon network came online. On each colony, similar devices emerged from hiding places where they had waited for generations. Some had been built into the foundations of cities, others buried beneath monuments to the exile, and still others hidden in plain sight as decorative elements that no one had thought to examine closely. Amy Rodriguez received her final orders as the Terra's Vengeance completed its systems check. The flagship would lead the first wave of ships toward the galaxy's core, followed by battle groups from every major human settlement. But this would not be a random assault. Human strategists had spent centuries studying Council fleet movements, trade routes, and defensive positions. They knew exactly where to strike for maximum effect. Danny Cooper watched as the last ships left Shipyard 7, massive vessels that had been built in sections and assembled in the deepest parts of the asteroid field. Each ship represented years of work by thousands of people, incorporating technologies that had been refined through generations of innovation. The human fleet was not just larger than anything the Council could field, it was also more advanced in ways that the alien species could not even comprehend. On Terra Nova, one of humanity's oldest and largest colonies, families began boarding evacuation ships that would carry them to safety while the military vessels departed for war. But many of these civilian ships were also equipped with advanced defensive systems and hidden weapons. Humanity had learned during the exile that the distinction between civilian and military was often meaningless when facing an enemy that saw your entire species as a threat. The fleet movements began with careful precision, ships departing from hidden bases and secret shipyards throughout human space. Each group followed routes that had been planned for decades, using navigation techniques that made them nearly impossible to track. The Council's sensor networks were designed to detect conventional faster-than-light travel, but human ships used modified engines that operated on principles the alien species had never encountered. Kevin Walsh broadcast his final message to all human commanders as the fleets prepared to enter Council space. Remember, we do not seek to become the monsters they claimed we were. We fight to reclaim our rightful place, not to destroy those who opposed us. But if they force us to choose between their comfort and our survival, we choose survival. The first ships to reach the edge of Council space were scout vessels, small and fast craft that could gather intelligence without being detected. Their crews had trained for this mission their entire lives, learning to mimic alien technology and blend in with normal space traffic. They carried updated information about Council fleet positions, defensive installations, and the political situation in the core worlds. Amy Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Terra's Vengeance as her ship emerged from hyperspace at the rally point near the Titan Nebula. Around her, other human vessels materialized from the void like ghosts becoming solid. Hundreds of ships at first, then thousands, as battle groups from across human space converged on the coordinates that had been embedded in the beacon signal. The sight was magnificent and terrifying at the same time. Ships of every size and design, from massive dreadnoughts like the Terra's Vengeance to small fighters that could outmaneuver anything in the Council fleet. Many of the designs incorporated alien technology that had been captured or salvaged during the exile, but modified and improved by human engineers who understood that adaptation was the key to survival. Danny Cooper's work was done, but he remained at the shipyard to coordinate the final supply runs that would keep the fleet operational during the coming campaign. The asteroids around him were nearly empty now, their purpose fulfilled after centuries of preparation. Soon, they would be abandoned as the human population moved toward the galaxy's core, following their military forces in the greatest migration in human history. The Council's border sensors began detecting unusual activity near their outer territories. But the readings made no sense. Ships appeared and disappeared from their screens, following no recognizable pattern. Energy signatures that did not match any known technology, communications in languages that their computers could not translate. The first reports reached Council headquarters with warnings that something was moving toward the core worlds, but no one could determine what it was or where it had come from. Lisa Hamilton watched the display screens in Jake Morrison's archive as reports came in from across human space. Fleets departing from worlds she had never heard of, equipped with weapons she could barely understand. The quiet farming community where she had grown up was just one small part of a civilization that had been hiding in plain sight for 3 centuries, waiting for the moment when they could finally return home. Jake Morrison wiped the dust from another old data core as he worked deep beneath the surface of New Montana. The underground archive stretched for miles in every direction, filled with the memories of a people who had been forced to leave everything behind. He had spent 40 years of his life down here preserving the truth that the galaxy wanted to forget. The younger generation living above ground knew bits and pieces of the old stories, but they had never seen the real records that Jake kept safe in these tunnels. The farming world of New Montana looked peaceful from space, with its golden wheat, fields and small towns scattered across 3 continents. Most people who lived there now had been born on this world or others like it, far from the center of the galaxy where the big decisions were made. They worked the land, raised their families, and lived quiet lives. But Jake knew better. He knew what their ancestors had been through, and he knew why they were really here. Lisa Hamilton walked down the main street of Millerville, the largest town on New Montana, carrying her engineering tools in a worn leather bag. She had been called to check the old foundation systems beneath the town hall, something that should have been simple work. The building had been one of the first constructed when the colony was established 300 years ago, and the basement. Systems were acting strange. Power fluctuations, odd readings on the sensors, nothing that seemed dangerous, but enough to worry the town council. As she descended into the basement, Lisa noticed that the walls were thicker than they should be, for a simple foundation. Her scanner picked up unusual materials built into the structure, metals that were not commonly used in standard colony construction. She followed the readings deeper, through a maintenance corridor that seemed to go much further than any building would need. After 20 minutes of walking, she found herself in a small chamber that her scanner said should not exist, according to the building plans. In the center of the chamber sat a device unlike anything she had ever seen. It was about the size of a dinner table, made of materials that seemed to shift color in the light. Strange symbols covered its surface, and a low humming sound came from somewhere inside it. Lisa approached carefully, her scanner going wild with readings she could not understand. When she touched the surface, the device suddenly came alive with light and sound. Jake felt the tremor through the archive floors and knew immediately what had happened. Someone had found one of the beacons. He had been expecting this day for years, hoping it would come while he was still alive to explain what it meant. He gathered the most important records and made his way to the surface, something he rarely did anymore. The sunlight hurt his eyes after so many hours underground, but he needed to find whoever had activated the beacon. Lisa stood frozen as the device continued to pulse with energy. The symbols on its surface began to move and change, forming patterns that almost seemed like they were trying to communicate with her. She backed away from the device and pulled out her communication unit to call for help, but found that it was not working properly. The device seemed to be interfering with electronic systems in the area. When Jake arrived at the town hall, he found a crowd gathered outside and several people talking excitedly about power failures throughout the building. He pushed through the crowd and made his way to the basement, following the same path that Lisa had taken. He found her still standing in the small chamber, staring at the beacon with a mixture of fear and fascination. "You should not be here alone," Jake said as he entered the chamber. Lisa spun around, surprised to see the old historian who rarely left his underground archive. "This device is very old and very important. It has been waiting for someone to find it for a long time." Lisa looked between Jake and the beacon, trying to understand what was happening. "What is this thing? My scanners can't identify the materials, and it's interfering with all the electronics in the building. Should I call the authorities?" Jake shook his head and approached the beacon carefully. "The authorities do not need to know about this yet. This device is older than the colony, older than most of the people on this world. It contains a message that was meant to be found when the time was right. I believe that time has come." He placed his hands on the beacon's surface, and the device responded to his touch differently than it had to Lisa's. The lights became brighter, and the humming sound grew louder. Suddenly, the symbols on the surface began to project themselves into the air above the device, forming words in languages that Lisa did not recognize. But as she watched, the words began to change, transforming into text that she could read. "The time for return has come," the message said. "Earth remembers her children. The coordinates are embedded in this signal. Prepare the fleets. We have been patient long enough." Lisa stared at the floating words, not understanding what they meant. Earth? But Earth is just a legend, isn't it? The old stories about the home world that was lost? Jake turned to face her, and she could see tears in his old eyes. Earth is not a legend, child. Earth is real, and she is our home. But we were forced to leave her long ago, along with all the other worlds in the center of the galaxy. The Galactic Council decided that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed near the civilized worlds. The beacon continued to pulse, and more messages began to appear in the air. Coordinates to star systems, technical specifications for ships and weapons, and most importantly, confirmation that similar signals were being sent to human colonies throughout the galaxy. Lisa watched in amazement as the scope of what was happening became clear. "How many colonies are there?" she asked. Jake smiled for the first time in years, more than the council ever imagined. "We have been busy during our exile, child. We have learned to live in places they thought were impossible to inhabit. We have built worlds in asteroid fields, in the atmospheres of gas giants, in systems with radiation levels that would kill most species. We have not just survived. We have thrived." The beacon's message continued to unfold, revealing the true extent of human expansion during the centuries of exile. Thousands of worlds, millions of ships, technologies that had been developed in secret while the rest of the galaxy believed humanity had been reduced to a few scattered refugee camps. The Council had made a mistake when they underestimated human determination and adaptability. As the initial transmission ended, the beacon settled into a steady rhythm, maintaining contact with similar devices throughout human space. Lisa realized that her discovery had triggered something much larger than a simple archaeological find. She had accidentally activated a communication network that spanned the galaxy, connecting human colonies that had been preparing for this moment for generations. Jake began to explain the real history that he had spent his life preserving. How? Humanity had once been part of the Galactic Council, contributing technology and knowledge to the common good. How some council members had grown jealous and fearful of human innovation and rapid advancement. How a false incident had been staged to justify humanity's expulsion from civilized space. How the exile had not broken the human spirit, but had instead forged it into something stronger. The beacon's signal reached across the void to worlds with names like New Pittsburgh, Terra Nova, Freedom Station, and 1,000 others. On each world, similar devices activated, delivering the same message to people who had been waiting their entire lives to hear it. The return had begun, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again.